You're listening to Mid-Morning in the Cities on Rewind 93.9 WYEC.
Rewind 93.9 WYEC, Mid-Morning in the Cities. I'm Sean Patrick, and it is my distinct honor to be joined by legendary sportswriter Frank Deford. Mr. Deford, thank you for your time.
Oh, I'm delighted to be with you, Sean.
You've got a new book out now called I'd Know That Voice Anywhere. It's based off of your years of commentary for NPR. Tell us about first getting to NPR, and you come there with the Sports Illustrated experience and National Public Radio at the time. It's always kind of seemingly struggled because of various reasons, but bringing a sports perspective to NPR, what was that like?
Well, it's a wonderful thing because usually in sports, we're over to the side. We're in a niche. It's sports radio or ESPN or Sports Illustrated, what have you. And the great thing about NPR is that I'm talking to a broad audience, and so I don't have to do the X's and O's and the inside baseball. I can talk about the institution of sports and have some fun with it too.
It's fascinating because the setting of NPR, the way that audience tends not to be a sports fan audience, and that does open up the storytelling opportunities for you.
Absolutely. Now, the trick is though that some of the audience is dyed-in-the-wool sports fans, and I don't want to talk down to them. I don't want them to say that, dummy, I know that. So you're trying to please everybody, which of course you can't do. But I try to solve that the best I can by being broad and dealing with the major issues in sports, and then when I get too serious, trying to lighten things up a little bit. Sports is fun, it should be, and sometimes, particularly with all the numbers these days, we take it a little too seriously.
Author and sportswriter Frank Deford, our guest today on Mid-Morning in the Cities. We'll continue this conversation about his new book, I'd Know That Voice Anywhere. After this, you're listening to Mid-Morning in the Cities, presented by Curves Davenport on Rewind 93.9.
You're listening to Mid-Morning in the Cities on Rewind 93.9 WYEC.
Author and sportswriter Frank Deford, our guest today on Mid-Morning in the Cities. We're talking about his new book, I'd Know That Voice Anywhere, and talking about your years of doing commentaries for NPR, which makes up much of this book. We're talking about the fun. What has been the most fun for you? The story that you put together for NPR, the commentary that you put together that was the most fun for you?
Well, the most fun I ever had was having Shakespeare cover the Super Bowl. That was at the top of my list. I've done Gilbert and Sullivan in the baseball dugout watching guys spit. I did one on opera, and I know nothing about opera whatsoever. So trying to borrow from the world at large and drag it into sports, it's a gamble because humor is always a gamble, but those are the ones I remember the best because those are the ones that worked. I've forgotten the ones that fell on their face.
Tell us about the similarities between Babe Ruth and Winnie the Pooh.
Well, of all the people, and this occurred to me in the 1920s, and the 1920s was the flappers, and, the world had come back together, and it was Prohibition, and it was a very exciting time, unless perhaps you were in Chicago and Al Capone was shooting you. But of all the people from the 1920s, the two that I remember the most are Babe Ruth and Winnie the Pooh. Not that Winnie the Pooh is a people, but he's close enough, and we still remember Ruth. I mean, it's amazing the longevity that his fame has, whereas in other sports, boy, it's fleeting. I mean, they'll forget Michael Jordan in another 10 years. He'll be yesterday's newspaper, and it's a shame because They're great athletes in every era.
One of the great sportscasters of the past several decades, Frank Deford, is our guest today on Mid-Morning in the Cities, and we're talking about his new book, I'd Know That Voice Anywhere, and we'll continue that conversation and wrap things up next. Mid-Morning in the Cities, presented by Curbs Davenport on Rewind 93.9.
You're listening to Mid-Morning in the Cities on Rewind 93.9 WYEC.
We're talking with Frank Deford today on Mid-Morning in the Cities. His new book is called I Know That Voice Anywhere. It's a collection of his NPR commentaries. And, you mentioned your point about Michael Jordan is interesting. The way that the new media has shrunken the news cycle, but it's also seemingly shrunken people's star power in that unique way, whereas Babe Ruth's legend could be built through newspapers that have already turned to dust. Today's day and age, when somebody writes a story on SportsIllustrated.com, it's buried at the bottom of the website, for decades.
Well, journalism, not just sports journalism, but journalism has changed so completely, so utterly. That's one of the great things about NPR is that you are talking, to a full audience, whereas most people only go to the niche that they are interested in, whether it's sports or whatever. And there's also this manic, because of the 24/7 thing. We've got to promote. We got to make it big. We got to make it big. And so all of a sudden, to take the case of Jordan, we've got to argue about whether he or Stephen Curry, are in the same league as each other, which is crazy. Curry is only 25 years old or something. Let's wait till the end of his career, and then we can judge how he ranks, how he stacks up against Jordan. Or Bill Russell. The world has completely forgotten Bill Russell, who won more championships than anybody else.
That is fascinating too. And Russell is he's such a great character too. When you think about it, not just the championships, but outside of sports. At the time, if he'd been alive and if he'd been around in a social media era, everyone would be talking about Bill Russell all the time.
The fact that he won every year. Just extraordinary. He's one of these guys, and Jordan was too, by the way, and so is Curry. One of these guys who made people around him better. And that's a hard thing to judge. And so when you just look at the statistics, that doesn't pop out. But there are a few great players who weren't just great themselves, but improved everybody else. And to me, that's just as important. Now, of course, Chicago, everybody knows Chicago because of the Cubbies. So that's one thing that's not forgotten. Now if the Cubs win this year, and Lord knows they look like a juggernaut, then we'll forget all about them. But as long as they can keep losing, we've got Chicago to think of.
Absolutely. Well, Frank Deford, this book is incredible. I'd Know That Voice Anywhere is available now, and you're going out on a book tour, and good luck with that, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for talking to me.
It has been my distinct honor to have Frank Deford as our guest today on Mid-Morning in the Cities, talking about his new book, I'd Know That Voice Anywhere. It's in stores now, and you can get it anywhere you want. You can get it online. Frank Deford, amazing writer, an exceptional sports writer, and very, very lucky to have had him on the show today. If you missed any part of this interview with Frank Deford, you'll be able to catch it online in a few moments on our Mid-Morning in the City podcast at QuadCityDailyNews.com. QuadCityDailyNews.com is powered by local radio. Mid-Morning in the Cities is presented by Curbs Davenport on Rewind 93.9.